Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on a question of privilege regarding a response to Order Paper Question Q1417 and one additional matter with regard to the same. Out of respect for time of the members present, I will not read the entirety of the question put to the government, but instead cut to the heart of the matter. There are two matters at hand which I request that you examine. On the first matter, this morning, the CBC reported that it obtained information that clearly demonstrates that the government misled the House of Commons in response to Order Paper Question Q1417 and thus breached members' privileges. The CBC report stated that the Prime Minister's trip to Montana over Easter of this year cost far more than the government reported to the House of Commons through Q1417. Q1417 reported to the House that the trip cost $23,846. However, the information obtained by the CBC discovered that the trip actually cost $228,000 and $839. Part of the cost of this trip is the provision of security for the Prime Minister, which is a necessary function of this role. And to be clear, Mr. Speaker, no one here is questioning the need for the Prime Minister to have access to security. However, the issue is at hand that from the CBC story, the government appears to have hidden the total cost from a Member of Parliament in an official request for details of this expenditure. Canadians have a right to know how their tax dollars are spent, and if they are spent wisely. In the instance of the story at hand, this principle translates to the public having a right to know things like why the cost of the Prime Minister's trip was so high, and whether, as it was a personal trip, if he personally paid for the full value of his accommodations. It's impossible for members to debate this issue without this information, which is why it was requested from the government via an Order Paper Question. As a member, I was not able to make an accurate determination on this matter as I was misled by the government's response to Q1417. Recourse on this breach privilege should be explored. Recently, the government has been castigated by your immediate predecessor for its response to Order Paper Question. On June 20th, your predecessor made a ruling on a question of privilege I raised when I received an ATI showing how the Natural Resources Department sought not to fully respond to an Order Paper Question I posed. When I rose in the House on June 15th, 2023, to explain this question of privilege, I noted, in the ATI, the Minister's Regional Advisor for Quebec asks in an email, what is the jurisprudence on those types of points of order? The Deputy Minister Chief of Staff, Kyle Horathia, responds, thanks, heard it after QB and did an inbox search of Q974. Already in touch with the Government House Leader's office, I'm expecting the Speaker to tut-tut and then say it's not him for him to judge the quality of a response. In your predecessor's response to me on June 20th, 2023, he did not seem to take too kindly to the statement and he chastised the government. He said, however, the Chair would like to note that it finds the remarks of public servants reported by the member very troubling. I am especially troubled by the comments from public servants to the effect that the Chair could not intervene in the case of a point of order and that this could justify an incomplete response. Your predecessor went on to say, it is true that based on many precedents, the Chair does not judge the quality of responses, and the reasons for that fact are understandable. However, my predecessors and I have repeatedly emphasized the importance of providing members with the information they need to do their work properly. Your predecessor continued on and concluded by saying, in the meantime, the Chair encourages ministers to find the right words to inspire their officials to invest their time and energy in preparing high-quality responses rather than looking for reasons to avoid answering written questions. However, in the case of Q1417, it appears the government not only didn't heed the advice from the Speaker, but went one step further and, per the information disclosed in the CBC article, misled the House. In doing so, they both violated members' privileges and demonstrated blatant disregard for the Speaker's words. There is precedent for this situation. On December 16, 1980, at page 5797 of the Hansard, the Speaker said, while it is correct to say that the government is not required by our rules to answer written or oral questions, it would be bold to suggest that no circumstance could ever exist for a prima facie question of privilege to be made where there is a deliberate attempt to deny the answers to an honourable member. Mr. Speaker, I would argue that this is one of those circumstances. However, Mr. Speaker, there is another problem on this matter that you must address. There is one more element to this question of privilege that is completely unprecedented, and I checked, in the history of our House of Commons. Typically, the task to examine evidence on this matter would fall to you. However, the problem now facing the House of Commons and your office is that the government representative who provided and signed off on the potentially misleading response was yourself, in your former role as Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. Q1417, the order paper question that is at the heart of the CBC story about the cost of the Montana trip, concerns the Privy Council Office, which supports the Prime Minister's office and the Cabinet. The PCO was asked to disclose the cost of the trip, and per the CBC story, they did not. The Privy Council Office would have responsibility for planning the logistics around travel and have oversight on budgetary matters. Again, in your role as Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, you signed off on the response to Q1417, which the CBC reported on today. I believe the situation may present concerns with regard to your ability to impartially rule on this matter. With deep respect to you and the institution of the Chair, I will now argue why this is so and also what action I believe you must take in considering a matter which you may have a conflict of interest. Prior to making these arguments, I want to be clear that I bear you no ill will, nor am I challenging your office. At the time of your election, there were no rules preventing parliamentary secretaries from occupying the Speaker's chair during the same Parliament. I respect that you occupy the Speaker's chair by virtue of your legal election to it. But here's the rub of the matter. Under normal circumstances, it would be virtually impossible for the Speaker of the House of Commons to ever be in a potential conflict of interest situation when making one of these rulings. That's because the Speaker is a member of Parliament elected to office by their peers at the start of a Parliament, immediately after an election. Elections wipe the slate of Parliament clean. However, this week members had to elect a new Speaker in the middle of this parliamentary term. The problem in this instance, however, is that you, prior to your election of Speaker, held several official governmental roles. Up until September, you served as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister and signed off on question 1417. So now, you have to rule whether there's enough evidence for the House to consider if you, in your former role as Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, potentially breached members' privilege by misleading the House when signing off on question 1417. Mr. Speaker, we both know that the occupant of the Speaker's chair must be viewed as an unimpeachable, neutral arbiter of House proceedings. A Speaker having to rule on a question of privilege on a matter caused by them during their former role in government is an incredible matter without precedent. To re-emphasize, I am honor-bound to afford you the respect you deserve in the role of Speaker, out of respect for the office of the Speaker and its essential functions within the institution of Parliament. However, out of that same responsibility, I believe you are also honor-bound to recuse yourself from ruling on this matter. This is a matter that affects the privilege of all members. The Speaker's ruling set precedent, and it could breach all members' privilege if you make one ruling for you cannot conceivably be impartial due to the nature and actions of your previous government roles. Mr. Speaker, you have the ability to recuse yourself by allowing the House to consider the matter at hand. In this instance, the correct course of action should be to allow a motion to be moved on the matter and allow the House to determine the outcome. Then the outcome would be a decision of the House, not the Speaker, and a perception of loss of neutrality and potentially a further breach of privilege could perhaps potentially be avoided. And I think after the last couple of weeks, the Speaker of the Chair could use a bit of a boost. There is some relevant precedent on this matter. On December 12, 2021, during a question of privilege concerning allegations pertaining to the former clerk, the Speaker pointed out at the beginning of his ruling that the clerk himself recused himself from the matter and did not participate in the preparation of the ruling. This would be in keeping with the reference from Boss and Gagnon at page 323. When in the chair, the Speaker embodies the power and authority of the office strengthened by rule and precedent. He or she must at all times show or be seen to show the impartiality required to sustain the trust and goodwill of the House. Mr. Speaker, representative democracy only functions when ordinary people have confidence that the institutions that uphold their representatives' ability to make decisions on their behalf are working. Any issue that erodes that confidence should be immediately and forcefully addressed. Out of respect for Parliament, I ask that you recuse yourself from this matter and instead allow the House to debate it. Doing so would not be an admission of anything other than your deep respect for the necessity of perception of neutrality by the Chair. However, failure to do so could present problems in this regard at a time when all of us here need to do our utmost to respect the dignity of Parliament. In any event, should a case of privilege be found, I am prepared to move the appropriate motion.
I thank the member for Calgary-Nose Hill for her presentation. I'm just wondering if there's anybody want to make comments on that, or maybe they'll get back to us at a later date, hopefully as quickly as possible on this particular affair. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Yes, just to provide assurances, Mr. Speaker, we'll review what the member has said and report back at some point in regards to the state.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We'd like to review the blues as well, and we may choose to come back to the House on this matter.
Okay. And the Honourable Member for Sandwich Gulf Islands, I believe, has her hand up as well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I don't need to review the blues. I listened carefully to what the Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill had to say. I think she presented a cogent, thoughtful, and respectful argument, and I hope the Speaker will take it into consideration and decide that it is the wisest course to recuse Speaker's role from this particular point of privilege. Thank you, Mr.
Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today on a point of order to briefly provide additional information in the question of privilege I raised yesterday. I would like to point out that the government failed to disclose over $200,000 in costs incurred for the Prime Minister's ski trip to Montana in order paper question responses not once but at least twice. In the government's response to Q 1417, which was filed by the member from Megantic-Larab and signed off by the then Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister and the current Speaker of the House, Part F of the question clearly asks, are there any costs incurred or expected to be incurred by the government related to the trip that are not included in the response, and to A, and if so, what are those costs or expected costs broken down by item and type of expense? The government was clearly aware of the extra $200,000 in costs that would be incurred, yet they failed to provide that information in the response. In a second order paper answer, this time of Q 1582, which was also filed by the member from Megantic-Larab, the government was given a second chance to provide the real cost of the Prime Minister's trip, yet again they failed to do so. So this is a pattern. I ask that it be considered that the House that the government misled the House in both instances, in both order paper question answered, and that both instances be considered. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Of course, we'll add that to the investigation that we'll be doing. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.